welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. Little pause there, don't know what happened. I think my brain went into shutdown mode. Hopefully, if you didn't see that, that's because our wonderful Andy has edited that out.
Windows update, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe just...
Laura had a Windows update for a minute there.
My brain just went doo-doo-doo-doo like that, and I was gone. But yeah, or maybe you won't notice the difference. Maybe that's what I'm always like. James, how are you doing?
I'm good. I have to say, we're going to be we're below 0 Fahrenheit. So I don't know what all you rocket scientists doing Celsius, what that means. We're going to be that overnight, and just had about 10 inches of snow. So I'm a little sore from shoveling, because when you get old and fat like I am, and you got to go shovel snow for a couple of hours, it's not a good scene. So a lot of damage today.
Is there not a Homer style-esque Mr. Plow that you can call?
You know, I each year we don't get a ton of snow, but when we get it, it tends to be in decent amounts. So I talk myself every year like, hey, it's a way I can, stay in shape rather than use, because I do have a snowblower. But every year I'm like, I'm going to go through the hassle doing an oil change and like maintaining this stupid thing and inflating the tires. I'll just go out and, it's a couple times a year, I'll just go shovel it. And I'm in the midst right now. I think you're smart, Laura. I'm an idiot. I should have just get the blower ready and save myself the aggravation.
Yeah, well, don't do what I did, which is one particular year of bad snow here. I decided, in my wisdom, to scrape it off my car with a shovel that I didn't know had a slight metal tip on the end, and scratch the hell out of my paintwork, which my lovely dad came and said, yeah, you can't do anything about that. You've just decreased the value of your car by another few £1,000s. Brilliant. But yeah. How are you doing, Alan?
All right, yeah. I should have mentioned other operating. I was going to say other operating systems are available, but I'm not sure that's true. And James, you just don't have any idea how exercise actually works, do you? I mean,
no.
Going out twice a year and killing yourself and pulling all your muscles, and then not doing anything for the rest of the year isn't classified as exercise. That's just
I
stupidity.
do 12-ounce curls all week, Alan. That's my main form of exercise. So
12-ounce cut. Is that just lifting the slice of pizza to your mouth? Is that what that is?
Yeah. Pizza one hand, and I like my Coors Banquet 12-ounce bottles. That's what I like. And I just do this. That's how it works.
Coors doesn't qualify as beer, though.
I was going to say
the regular lager. It's a lager. I mean,
it's got a whiff of
it's not a light beer,
it.
for Christ's sake. I mean, come on, help me out here.
Yeah, but it's not. No. It's not a Coors Light, but it's not German. Let's put it that way.
I have a Guinness shirt on. The problem is that when I drink Guinness, my wife throws me out of the house, and I'm not going to get into why, but let's just say it. Has certain impact on my intestinal system. So if I happy wife, happy life, I can wear the shirt and selectively.
I'm thinking that'd be a more effective way of melting the snow, though.
That would be true too.
A quick recommendation for you from friends of mine who've been to weddings in kilts, who then drink Guinness. It's a very handy situation to be in, because access is very available, if you know what I mean, if required. So, but enough said about that. Who thought that's where it would go? But here we are. Alan, I'll come to you first. We obviously were in Scottish Cup action at the weekend on Saturday. A 5:30 kickoff. I was actually at the game, and it was very strange having the whole day to do things and then not go to quite an evening game, but like this kind of middle of the day-ish, middle of the evening game. It was strange. But what did you think of the overall performance and the fact that we actually managed to pull off the win?
Yeah, no, I'm delighted. I mean, obviously, on the one hand, you want in a cup, you just want to get through. But on the other hand, with a game coming up on Wednesday, the performance was actually important to me, and I'm sure many others as well. Just really for that reason, is how in what nick are we looking going into that absolutely potentially season-defining game, which we'll get into shortly. But so I was kind of happy with the performance overall. Now, I do like to talk about the opposition. So I thought Kilmarnock were pretty poor, actually. I didn't really know what McInnes was trying to do. He didn't do his usual man-to-man thing. He didn't really do a pressy thing. They were kind of passive. mainly. Watching McGregor run through the centre of their midfield without getting clattered on a few occasions was kind of surprising. We were able to play through the lines reasonably easily, and if we'd finished, we had I think we had a bad day, a bad variance day. So, both in terms of our finishing, little bit of opposition keeper play. I mean, 7 saves is decent from O'Hara, who had to come on as a sub. Bad finishing, and then the variance factors involved in their goal. The ricochets and the ball coming off the arm and it falling perfectly in front of the goal for someone to tap in. All that, fine. Fair enough. They probably deserved a goal during the game, but it could easily, have been a 3-4-5 kind of one kind of sort of game. So overall, happy with it. I think some of the individual performances are probably of more interest, really, from a sort of health check perspective as we go into Wednesday. But as I say, overall, pretty contented with it.
Yeah, we'll get into some of the individual performances once I get James's thoughts on it. James Allen talked there about the kind of switch up in McInnes's style. He's usually a much more man-to-man type guy, and that's obviously how I imagine Celtic would have prepared. Did you pick up on that difference in style, and if so, like, what impact do you think it had for us sort of towards the start of the game, if not the whole 90 minutes?
Well, I'm convinced he's on a burner account and a subscriber to the Huddle Breakdown, and just decided to get it right up us by having a non-man marked first half. So I was delighted to see him do something different, because it's so unusual for that to happen. And I agree with Alan. Like it was, to a degree, it was kind of compact and somewhat narrow, but very passive and pretty deep. And they just don't, they don't have a lot of. They have some big guys that are okay, but they don't have a lot of athleticism in midfield. So. And then when he switched, when he kind of flipped the switch in the second half, they gave us a little bit, but in his post match talking about, again, this is like, I don't know how you can have scouted Celtic and analyzed us over the last 3 or 4 months and come up with the game plan that high pressing our center backs is the smart thing to do. Like, that just, given you're a team like, Kilmarnock. And that's, again, when we get into our some of the standout performers on the player side. I mean, that's like a recipe for letting Rio Hatate go berserk, right? You're trying to high press those guys up there and stretch the pitch, make it wide open at Celtic Park, and then it's just like, Rio, have a day. And that's, in the second half, that's kind of what happens. So, and McGregor too, like all of the things that we've been talking about and you get worried about with McGregor being the focal point and build up. I mean, it's just, the first half, it was like a stroll for him. So yeah, not the most coherent game plan that we faced, but again, there's back to this issue, is that you still have to do it. Like in some of the recent games when teams have come out that way, we haven't been setting the light on fire. And I agree with Alan, like, the finishing was the main issue, but we've kind of do with that. Like, if you look at our underlying performance levels most of the season, like we've been, as Martin would say, we were due to have a swing of not finishing. And this was one of those games. So it's not because of that. It's just kind of the way things work. Like, you have these games, and so it very easily could have been a 5-0 type game, or even higher, given the chances that we created. So I'm very pleased with the game. I just don't, again, think there's a lot that we can extrapolate out of this. I kind of view this as a kind of a kissing cousin of the, I think it was the St. Johnston game before we went into the Derby. And it was like, a lot of people got worked up, like, this guy looked great, that guy looked great. And then, we went into Ibrox and it was like, whoa, what happened? So I think partly we face a similar setup potentially, and we'll get into young boys later in the show. But so in a microcosm, excellent, a lot of great performances. Very, I think outside of like the maybe first 15 or 20 minutes, when I theorized we probably had to adjust, because my guess is because we have, people that actually, I'm assuming game plan and scout and get prepared for a McInnes coached side, probably set up to assume they were going to man mark, which would be the reasonable expectation. And so maybe we had to tweak things a little bit after the first 10, 15, 20 minutes. And then from there, it was kind of, very comfortable. Outside of scoring goals, which, that's a key thing in a knockout game in a cup tournament. So I get why there was, some anxiety, and I certainly shared that. I was like, oh my God, this is one of those games we're going to go to extra time when we have no business doing it. And again, that's just kind of football. That happens. But kind of the underpinnings of the game, we were completely dominant, and actually a lot of positives.
Yeah, that wee mention of kissing cousins brought me back to a 1990s primary school classroom in Scotland and learning my alphabet. Of course, some parts of the country took that message a little more literally than you were supposed to. But, the less said about that, the better. I was actually, like I said, I was at the game, and certainly I agree that the number of chances we created was great, but I felt very influenced in terms of my view of the overall performance by a lot of the negativity in the stadium towards those missed chances, especially in the first half. The groans of frustration that don't always come across on TV and things like that when Hatate skies it over the bar, or Maeda in the first half hit one pretty much straight at the goalkeeper, that kind of thing. We were creating great chances. We were, had a lot of possession, especially in that first half, but there was an underlying frustration amongst the crowd anyway in the stadium, I think, that we just didn't seem to be able to be putting them away. But like you say, that just happens from time to time. Alan, in terms of individual performances, who did you really rate, and did you see anybody maybe give a better account of themselves than they have in recent weeks, perhaps?
So, there were a couple of questions going in. We wondered whether, Trusty had a really bad day against Dundee away. Would we revert to Scales? And I think that would just sort of create a whole load of complications, in terms of the squad management, really. And so I was kind of pleased, not for any negative reasons towards Scales. I was just pleased that Rodgers elected to keep Trusty in there. I think his previous performances had justified him being given a chance to kind of rectify. And I think it was an absolutely excellent response from Trusty in particular. He won virtually all of his aerial duels, of which there were many. I mean, Kilmarnock's passing was awful. I think they were passed around about 57, 58%, which is one of the lowest that Celtic have seen from any team all season. They were just woeful with the ball at feet. And there was a lot of balls lumped up. Trusty won like 21 challenges, and now the next highest was 11 Carter Vickers. So that gives you some idea. He only lost a couple, so 91% success rate in that regard, I thought was a pretty decent, response. He was strong. He won the ball back 4 times in the defensive third, which is the highest in the game. He won back possession 15 times. Or he won 1 possession 15, which is like the next highest was 9. So, and he didn't lose possession. I'm not talking about passes here. I'm talking about other sort of defensive actions. Didn't lose the ball from a defensive action. So, and he also 97% passing off 109 passes. He had 15 pack passes as well, and he was only behind Hatate in that sense. So I thought that was a really strong response to a very poor performance. And I think, when you're playing for a club like Celtic, that's important. And that kind of, to me, that shows an element of self-confidence, of determination on his part, all those kind of non-data measurable sort of characteristics, mental characteristics, personality characteristics you want to see in terms of how a player responds to a really poor performance. So that for me was really pleasing. And then Hatate himself, I mean, as James said, systematically, Kilmarnock couldn't have done more to invite Hatate to get some form back. I mean, Hatate's been more of an issue in terms of, whereas Trusty's had one really, really poor game, Hatate's form, I think, has been poor for a sustained period of time. To the extent that, we chatted about that, did our piece on it. McCowan had started 3 of the last 4 games, and actually, if you look at the underlying data for the season, McCowan's would actually have had a good shout for actually being first pick in that position now. But, such were the gaps in midfield. Hatate had plenty of room to operate, and he did really well. He had an excellent game. He led the team in sort of pass packing stats. He created 5 chances. I know he didn't get any assists. He had the most secondary assisting passes as well. He took the most defenders out of the game, 7 of anyone else in the team, and also had quite a few shots as well as that glaring miss, which gave him that miss in its own just about gave him the highest XG in the game as well. So Hatate had the highest overall packing score. I would have probably had him as man of the match. He had the second highest expected scoring contribution behind Kuhn, the second highest overall attacking threat score. So yeah, really strong performance from Hatate. So that's great to see if he's going to be the one that gets the nod on Wednesday. And as I say, I fully expect the same starting 11 on Wednesday as we saw in that match on Saturday. So they were the 2 that really stood out for me. The other point I wanted to raise for discussion really was just Nicholas Kuhn again, because we were so ridiculously left side dominant in terms of always going down that side. Engels was quite heavily involved. Maybe didn't have the sort of tidiest of games, but he kind of he did okay. Taylor and Maeda, and then you've got the most dangerous player on the pitch, and yet we don't seem to get the ball to him that often. And I don't know. I guess I just wanted to throw that one open for discussion really. So yeah, they were the kind of main player driven pieces that I think that I noticed.
It's funny you should say that about those 2 particular issues, because this is one of the times where certainly the eye test failed me a bit as far as Hatate was concerned, because I'm delighted to hear those stats about him, but I have to say I did get the impression when I was there watching the game that I still felt on occasions he was kind of wasteful with his possession and still had the issues of giving it away in situations where he shouldn't. But obviously that, as you say, on this particular occasion seems to have been far outweighed by what he did well. And if we could get that from him every week, that would definitely be preferable. And again, to go on to the Kuhn thing, I think what you touched on there was very evident, especially I felt even in the second half, the ball was around that sort of left back area for us quite a lot, I felt, and sometimes we did struggle to get out of that area. And obviously in terms of getting that to Kuhn, you can't possibly be further away from him in terms of the pitch than in that position. So I do think we struggled with that occasionally, and in the words of my 7-year-old nephew, when Taylor get taken off, I think it's okay that he gets substituted. Dante Laura is what he said to me, so that's fair enough.
Stinging.
Yeah, that's a burn. That's a burn for you. James, in terms of individual performances for you, based on what Alan said, anything you'd like to sort of further expand on, or anybody else that's not been mentioned that you'd like to highlight?
Well, in my land of delusion, where Derek McInnes has a burner account and is doing something personal to this podcast, I'll stick with that theme and suggest that Callum McGregor has a personal vendetta against me to continue to score from long-range shots in a completely unsustainable way. Hopefully it continues for the entire season. But I thought McGregor was very good. Again, kind of like Alan with Hatate, it was a context that he tends to thrive in. So, I think that's important to consider. But yeah, he's been very good shooting from distance. And this is the other thing that I wanted to raise with that, because when I wrote a piece about it earlier in the season, basically looking at long range shooting and drawing the analogy with Steph Curry and NBA shooting and 3-pointers, was that I thought it was a good idea that he did continue to do it. Because he's generally pretty good at it. But also all long distance shots are not created equal. So just because a guy shoots from 20 yards, if it's relatively open sight to goal, not a lot of defenders in the way, and relatively central, that's usually an okay shot to take, actually. It's not that bad, particularly if, as McGregor has shown over the years, at least average, if not maybe a little above average in shooting from that kind of distance, just from a kind of technique perspective and being able to both place and strike the ball. It's just the issue, again, over longer periods of time, larger sample size, his scoring rate of doing that is just very unlikely. It's Aberdeen first 11 games level of unlikely to persist at the rate that it has so far this season. So I wanted to highlight that. I thought he was very good. And I want to echo trust. I mean, I talked about it on the Extra Time show with Alan and Martin about how I hoped that Rodgers was using kind of the public dressing down of Trusty as a motivation tactic and would throw him back out there, because I know there was some speculation going into the game, not only from us, but a lot of people thinking, hey, man, that was pretty bad. And he basically called him out publicly. He's probably going to go to Scales. And, it turns out it looks like he did use it as a motivation tactic. It looked like it probably worked. The one thing Kilmarnock do have is some big, strong dudes. And, Trusty was definitely not muscled off the ball. And all of the stuff that Alan already quoted and highlighted, I thought he was excellent in that respect, meaning that if it was like call out, get your butt in gear, and be tough, like that was that kind of performance from him. And that I think that is positive heading into Wednesday, because we're going to need him, particularly with his pace in playing against a team of young boys level. So just wanted to echo that on Trusty as well.
Alan, it's an interesting point James raises about how direct Brendan Rodgers was in his criticism of Trusty before this game. I don't want to use the word harsh or anything like it, because I don't necessarily think it was, but do you think it's just a case of he personally knows or has a personal idea of how Trusty would respond, and that's why he took that approach, when we know there's other players who've had equally bad, or if not worse, performances in the season who haven't received that kind of public dressing down? Is that just a manager knowing his players, do you think?
I don't know. In terms of, I can only speculate. I don't know Trusty. His character, he comes across as, I would say, fairly typical American athlete, more articulated than most of ours. But
don't worry, James, you're not an athlete. Don't worry.
Pretty calm and laid back. I'd kind of, if I was him, I'd kind of take it as a compliment. If Rodgers thought you were fragile and maybe likely to kind of retreat into a shell if you criticised, then that I don't think he would have gone down that road. But I do think there's a certain, whether you're Brendan Rodgers, whether you're Jurgen Klopp or Guardiola or somebody in the third division with Berwick Rangers or whatever, there's a certain aspect of British football, especially in Scottish football even more so, about not being bullied off the ball that is just not acceptable. It's just not acceptable, especially for a 6'3" centre half, right? So that aspect of play, doesn't matter who you are, if you manage in British football, you get that, and you're going to call somebody out on that, because that's just not acceptable, especially for you play for a big club against a wee club. That level of physicality is just given. It has to be a given, has to be a default, no negotiation. That's what you have to do. So I think there's an element of British and especially Scottish football culture that comes through in that, in the reason for the dressing down. But the actual dressing down, I don't believe Rodgers would have done unless he knew who he was dealing with and would get a good reaction, because otherwise it would have been crushing for maybe a less self-confident player, I would say. But whatever the end result was, I thought he was excellent. And I say only Hatate really. It wasn't just with Hatate, by the way, that I know Kilmarnock kind of played into his hands a bit, and that sort of sounds like damning with faint praise. Every player's got their tells. What I noticed with Hatate that we just haven't been seeing is he started doing that little thing again where he bumps into players and kind of uses their strength against them to kind of accelerate away from them and turn direct. And he did that a few times in the game, and I thought, oh yes, that's the real Hatate we want to see. Just don't see enough of that. I haven't seen enough of that this season at all. Nothing like good enough. But if it's Champions League and for whatever his motivation is, Champions League game coming up in the shop window or whatever it is, and whatever is kind of motivating him. And I suspect that's a very complicated conversation for a proper psychologist to have. He saw little tells that he was back to doing some of the things that he does when he's really at it. So hopefully that continues. It certainly needs to be there for Wednesday night.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, like you say, I think that's Rodgers showing a little bit of his experience and his nous, knowing his players and how they'll react. And, perhaps if picking a name at random, but perhaps, if Liam Scales, for a comparable player, if he'd had a similarly bad performance, maybe he wouldn't have treated him that way if he thinks his response is going to be different. And I think it goes back to, we've all watched plenty of documentaries about managers and things over the years, and some of them say, treat all your players the same, but I think that the prevailing attitude nowadays is that they are individuals and you have to treat them individually, and that means changing your approach depending on who it is you're dealing with. Pep Guardiola is the same, although I'm sure I wouldn't mind Pep Guardiola giving me a dressing down for my footballing ability, but I surely won't be asking him for an autograph, that's for sure. Anytime soon.
So it's I think even the great managers realise this. I'm always remembering Alex Ferguson when early days at Manchester United, and the players, he started to try and, because the squad that he'd inherited from Ron Atkinson especially was incredibly ill-disciplined. There's a huge drinking culture, all that, right? So it was all, with Ferguson, it was all the sort of traditional stuff. He'd turn up in suits, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, Cantona turned up with ripped jeans and his flamboyant cravat, and Gary Neville said, well, what about him? Well, it says, when you do what he does on the pitch, son, you can wear what you want. It was that was the sort of attitude. And, so every manager indulges the kind of maverick in that sense. And, you can argue the rights and wrongs of that. But I think in the sort of febrile atmosphere of a professional football dressing room, you do what you have to do, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I might be completely making this up, but I do remember on a tour of the Camp Nou, I'm talking 15, nearly 20 years ago now, going down the stairs, down the tunnel, and they had a small chapel just off the tunnel, which I believe they said was created for Ronaldinho. He used to go in and pray before matches, and I thought, listen, if Ronaldinho does what Ronaldinho does, then he can pray to whoever he wants, and we'll take it. And I think that was the attitude of the people at Barcelona, and it certainly worked for a few years. James, looking at those missed chances again, I've seen a lot of narrative online, especially about Kyogo taking an awful lot of the flack for the missed chances. Perhaps because his job is as a striker to put away goals, perhaps because one of the chances he missed, especially in the first half, was, should have almost been a banker for going in. There is a bit of a narrative, and I don't know whether it's with the transfer rumours and things coming about that, some people suggesting he's overblown or he's not as good as people have said he was, and certainly he isn't having as good a season as his best season under Ange, as we've discussed before. But I don't know about you. I'm thinking that's all. Take it from me to say this. I know what a hot take is, and I think those are particularly hot takes that even I wouldn't subscribe to. What's your opinion on the current narrative around Kyogo? Is he getting a little bit of unfair treatment, do you think?
I think longer term it's unfair. I think in the recent history there is some fairness to the issues with his finishing, because it hasn't been even around expected, meaning that his kind of post-shot XG, as we nerds would say, is lagging his XG, and that's kind of a simple proxy for finishing. Now, it's not a huge number, because again, we're not talking about, he gets, let's say, 3 shots a game. We're not talking volumes of chances here over even already this season. So that's why you have to take a longer view. I think it's perfectly human, possibly. And, I think generally he's been a good soldier, so to speak, meaning that if, as some reports have suggested, he wanted to leave over the summer, he did hire a new agent. We've talked about this on recent episodes. it's perfectly natural. Someone in his life circumstances and career standpoint would want to go somewhere else. It's not some kind of weird decision or preference that he would have. I think given that context, he hasn't downed tools. He's been running around like a lunatic. Like his measurables, generally speaking, are as good, if not better, with that one kind of significant part, which is finishing, which, he's a striker. Finishing is important. So how much of that could reasonably be contributed to by some kind of undergirding, preference to leave? I mean, I don't think that would, as we've talked about with Greg Taylor, these guys aren't robots. Could that play a factor? I couldn't rule it out. I have no way of knowing, no way of measuring it. All we can say is that his measurables is that his finishing hasn't been as good as we would hope. Importantly, as we've talked about on recent episodes, that season under Ange was a purple unicorn. His finishing was unsustainably good, and opposition keepers threw the ball in the net for him or some too. So when you put his conversion rate was ridiculous. So he's never going to do that again. Very unlikely, again, we have to qualify it. Highly unlikely to ever do that again. So his conversion rate's actually not like dangerously horrible or anything like that this season. It just feels that way because it was so abstractly crazy good in that one season. So, I think it's unfair long term, but I understand why there's this anxiety, and you get into the classic confirmation bias, which is the pendulum swung. This guy's having trouble finishing, which he has to some degree this season. Not hugely, but enough that, when there's a big miss like a 1v1 against a goalkeeper, a Kilmarnock backup goalkeeper, I think it was O'Hara was in by then, then, I think that's understandable why people would be a little annoyed and disappointed at that kind of miss. But he's just as easily to score a hat trick on Wednesday and have 3 outrageous finishes because he's that quality of player. And we've seen it with his touch, his finishing in big games where he has been able to just do some outrageous things. So I wouldn't rule that out or even think that that's unlikely that he could pull that off on Wednesday in a big game.
Yeah, so I'd written about this, so Laura, and I agree with what everything James has said, but just to kind of, if you like, kind of boil it down, really is two things. One is, people tend to reference Kyogo's 34 goal season and say, right, that's the norm, that's the benchmark I'm going to test you against. And as James has said, the conversion rates were just insane. 64% of shots on target went in, 30% of all shots went in. But actually, if you look at this season, his underlying performance numbers, this is now his 4th season. So we're halfway through the 4th season. So we've got 2 seasons where he didn't score 34 goals, he scored like 20. And we've got this season where he's on whatever he's on 10. He's on track to score 20. So actually, he's performing consistently in 3 seasons, and he had 1 season that was like a massive outlier in terms of finishing. Okay, that's the narrative. Those are the facts. Actually, no, I mean the narrative. Those are the facts. So for me, he's performing about par, and nothing. To me, there's nothing to worry about other than this one thing, which the more and more I do this, if you're a striker and you're underperforming your expected goals, and he is underperforming his expected goals quite considerably. It was like minus 0.25, so a quarter of a goal every game he's underperforming. That's quite considerable. That has a huge impact on people's perception of how your general game goes. And this is the first time he underperformed slightly last season. It was 0.06 per game last season, which is small, right? Not to be noticeable. This season it's really noticeable. But he outperformed his XG in his first 2 seasons. So he just needs 1 or 2 to hit the back of the net. It's the old cliche as a striker. He just needs 1 or 2 to hit the back of the net, and he'll be fine. If you look at Ida, on the other hand, because I wrote about him in detail on the weekend, that is a very different story, right? His numbers compared to his admittedly short spell last season where he didn't play any Champions League matches, and he's and this season he's played some minutes in the Champions League. His numbers are just off the charts, different, lower essentially than last season. That is a bigger issue in my mind. I'm not worried about Kyogo. I am worried about Adam Ida.
It's interesting that you bring up Adam Ida as well there, because watching the game on Saturday, I love going to see Kyogo live. I don't know how much either of you have had a chance to do that, but it really does drive home to you the number of runs that he makes, the movement that he's got, even when he never receives the ball. If you just watch him, I'd love to have one of those player cams that's just watching him constantly, because it's unbelievable. Ida, on the other hand, and again, this evidence that I had was right in front of me, because I was sitting just behind the goal at the Jockstein end for the second half of the game on Saturday.
I tell you. Jeez,
yeah,
man.
I know. 2 or 3 rows from the front, I think it was, but who's counting? But there was a particular point where I think Kuhn, I can't remember if it was Kuhn or Johnston, got it to the byline and cut it back, and there was nobody there. And I looked, and Ida was standing sort of outside the 6-yard box, but towards the back post. And it was just the kind of situation where I was like, surely the decision making of any top striker would be to attack that front post, or if you're going to go back post, come closer into the goal so that a parallel ball across would be easier for the player for the winger to deliver. And I just thought it told me everything about why his goal return is as poor as it is. And I say this having all the respect in the world for what he can do well. He came on in that game on Saturday, I think, to be, for want of a better phrase, the big man up top that could hold the ball up and keep the ball away from the Kilmarnock goal while we tried to see out this 2-1 win. And it just frustrates me that I don't feel personally that he's got that natural instinct to be where the ball's going to be at its most dangerous in the box. I don't know, Alan, I'll come back to you on that one since you raised Ida. I don't know if you think that's an unfair assessment or not.
Yeah, I mean, I put up in the piece on huddlebreakdown.com showing his heat map from the game against Ross County as a counterpoint to Kyogo's heat map playing on the right wing. And Kyogo's was almost exactly what you'd want from Kyogo playing in that position. It was a mixture of, linking the play from a wide position and then hitting the 6-yard box hard right in the middle of the goal. And Ida's was like, there would be three sort of red dots around the centre circle and one on the left wing and a little bit in the box, but not too much. And it was just like, it was just so fuzzy. It was so irrational, right? And then you looked at his heat map from the next game. I think it was the Dundee game where he started again as a striker. And somebody must have had a word, because his heat map looked like what strikers should do. It was more central, he was more box orientated. But he just wasn't effective in the game. And I just worry that I kind of, a bit of a leap maybe some might call it, but my assessment, not based on data, just based on more of a kind of humanistic coaching perspective, is I just don't think I think he's got a very complicated view of the game. I think he overcomplicates his role, and given his physical attributes, I think he needs some coaching to really strip his game down like Kyogo does and make it as simple as possible and declutter his head and stop him getting involved in retreating to the halfway line to pass the ball back to the centre backs, sometimes beyond the centre backs. Stats1's pass OBV metric is quite handy at this. It hates Ida in terms of his passing. Right, absolutely loads of. He's like in the bottom 5 percentile of all players in the league for passing, and it's because of, I can tell you now, it's because of that, because of all these negative passes that he does, where he drops deep and then knocks it back miles. So he just needs to simplify his game to what a Celtic centre-forward requirements are in the system that we play, which is to get yourself, as you said, in between the posts and get on the end of balls fired across, probably quite low, and stick them in the net. I mean, it is the Giakoumakis. It's like Giakoumakis. You didn't want Giakoumakis anywhere near the ball outside the box because his touch was atrocious. Ida's is much better. He's a better technical player than Giakoumakis, but you want him making the same runs. And you want him Giakoumakis was brilliant at the one-touch finish. His technique under stress of controlling a ball, bringing it down, laying a pass off was awful. But his brain completely was decluttered of fog. If you gave it to him in the middle of the goal, and all he had to do was get something on it, and he didn't care what it was, a head, a shoulder, a gut, knee, anything. He would get something on it, and it would go in the back of the net. And you just want Ida to be more that player. I think I do anyway. I just think it's overcomplicated. I keep coming back to that phrase.
Yeah, James, I do want to get your thoughts on Ida, because as Alan's talking there, I'm thinking of, other strikers. He mentioned Giakoumakis, who was an out-and-out goal scorer and seemed to find himself in the right position. In terms of build and stature, two players that come to mind that are as similar as you'll get to Ida is Van Hooijdonk and Vennegoor of Hesselink. Now, I would say Van Hooijdonk was more athletic, faster paced, all that kind of thing than Ida. And while Vennegoor of Hesselink was anything but mobile, you would say he had the instinct to be in the right positions at the right place at the right time, if you like. Both of them, I think, appear to be a bigger aerial threat than Ida is, even though from a height perspective, I would imagine they're pretty similar. So where do you stand on Alan's point that maybe Ida is overcomplicating things, when we've had other players in the past of similar stature or style who have proved an awful lot more effective? Because for me, he should be able to bully defenders in this league, and he just doesn't seem able to do it.
Well, I think you see it at times. He's got, again, to use an NBA analogy, he's got his post-up move pretty decent. Like, he's able to, box out a defender to be able to receive the ball. The problem is what he does with it next. And generally speaking, if you've got a guy hanging on your back, that's a low expected value outcome setup for me, right? I mean, that's not an easy thing to be able to receive the pass with a big guy hanging on you, and then, with the ability to nudge you, shove you a little bit, give you a little elbow, a little sharp one in the back, in the kidney maybe, all these things that aren't really going to be called as fouls. And you've got to then, in tight spaces, play a pass in order to help, create a triangle and, roll the guy and go towards goal. Like, that's a tough job. And it's going to come with a lot of failure, because just by definition, it's not easy to do. And I think that's part of the problem, is he's not getting a lot of easy ones. He had a couple of nice passes. One was the offside goal. There was another chance that he was involved with, I thought was actually really good. There are times when he's facing goal and or has some peripheral vision. He seems to be pretty good at, I thought his play to the pass to Kuhn, that Kuhn inexplicably decided not to shoot with his right foot. That wasn't Ida's fault. I thought it was a nice setup. I thought it was a smart decision. Like, he in those circumstances, he seems to do okay. I worry about, there's different aspects of this. I'll call it a type of spatial intelligence, which is, going into space when there's not a ton of space. Like, he seems to get the obvious moves right, dropping deep and going into space and collecting passes that way. Like, he seems to have the engine, the motivation, the work rate to go do that stuff. It's a question of the little intricacies of finding tighter space where you can receive a pass and do something with a teammate that's efficient and effective. And just to put some numbers behind that, I'll call it, I haven't updated it in the last couple of weeks, but it's basically equivalent of like Alan's average pack receipt score. If you think of it that way, it's like you get into space, receive a pass, and you're taking out defenders. What's your average score for doing that? And his is half of Kyogo's, roughly, when I looked at it last. Right, so on an average per pass receipt basis, he's half as effective as Kyogo's was. So to me, that's, again, sample size isn't massive, but it fits with this issue that he's not really getting into those spots. And I'll give it an exact opposite type of player, who was also like a quixotic, fascinating player, was Abada. Abada was a guy who would just seem to have this knack to show up at the right place at the right time and anticipate things. Like, he could be an absolute train wreck on the ball, but was terrific at being in the box at the right time to be able to get on the end of chances. And I think he's kind of got the opposite of that, and to a degree. So I don't know how much of that's coachable. I don't know how much of it is, he can maybe improve, but he's just not. It's one of those relative weaknesses he might have. I don't know, but there's definitely, it's been my observational view, and then I think there's some pretty decent data to suggest that this is at least something that's an issue potentially, that has to be worked through. Like, again, it comes down to strengths and weaknesses. If your supposed nominal hold up striker is not good at doing that, getting into those pockets of space, then that's a big problem, and you got to redirect him in a different way. And I hope that's something they identify and do, because I agree with Alan. Like, I think he could be more like a Giakoumakis in the sense. But Giakoumakis was still more like Abada too, like that right place, right time. So that's that part that it's going to be tough.
You would argue that even in his best season, Kyogo was in that right place, right time bracket as well, just for the conversions that he could do. Which, by the way, James, I don't think you need to qualify your statements about conversions. I can't imagine somebody on Twitter's going to come back and have a go at you when Kyogo's conversion rate miraculously improves. I think you're safe on that one. I loved Abada. I think the way he used to arrive in, I can't remember a Celtic player in general who would arrive in at the back post the way he could. The epitome of ghosting in, if you want to use a football cliche, and just arriving there at the right time to put a goal away. Speaking of which, hopefully we can have somebody ghost in at the back post and score against Young Boys on Wednesday night, because as everybody I'm sure will be aware, we're back in Champions League action against the Swiss outfit on Wednesday at Celtic Park. We do need some sort of result out of this game, I'm sure, to guarantee qualification for us to at least the playoff stage, if not into the last 16. So, James, I'll come to you first on this one. In terms of Alan touched on it earlier, but in terms of lineups and things, how do you expect us to go, and do you have any information on the opposition that you think might be relevant to look out for on Wednesday night?
Yeah, the first question is easy to answer. I agree with Alan. I think it'll be the same starting 11 as went out on the weekend. I think in that, particularly with Scales coming on for Taylor and the questions about Valle moving to Como, I think that that all kind of fits. The fact that Valle didn't come on as the sub for Taylor. So I suspect it'll be the same starting 11. As far as young boys, so we talked about this a little bit on Friday with Martin, is an extra time, was that they're in a period of transition. They sacked their manager late last year. New manager came in over the winter break for them. They had an extended winter break. The ones that we used to have even longer. I think they were done like December 21st or 18th or something.
Yeah, it's about 3-4 weeks. Isn't it?
Yeah.
3 weeks.
Yep. So they've had some friendlies. They just played their first league match in return on Saturday. 0-0 draw against, I don't know, Winter Haven or something.
Winterthur, yeah. It's the bottom team in the league.
Bottom team. They set up nominally. Again, I didn't watch the game. I've watched some highlights on Y Scout. They had them coded as a 4-2-3-1. I looked at their manager's history, the guy that they hired. He's been kind of a flexible manager, playing different systems at different times, 3-4-2-1, 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1. So he's kind of been a tinkerer to a degree. The one noticeable difference in the game relative to how they've played even against like bottom table opposition in their domestic league is they were a lot more pass heavy in this game than they have been, more possession centric. So they've been kind of a not that bothered with possession team under the prior manager. And again, this guy's history is more of one, if you're going to talk about guys that lean more towards a Brendan Rodgers, like control, possession, pass rate, tempo type of manager. I think incrementally they've moved in that direction. How much of any of this is reliable heading into Wednesday? I would say very little, because, I suspect they'll be coming up with a game plan that's different. Assuming, again, we always talk about this. You assume the best of your opposition. You assume they're going to be prepared. You're going to assume that they're competent. Is that they're going to come up with a game plan having nominally 4 weeks to prepare for this game. That's going to be different than the one that they played, on the weekend. I will say they have a lot of like big, athletic, fast dudes, and that's not something that we always face domestically. And so I think we are strong favorites. We should be strong favorites. But I'm in this uncomfortable position where I have anxiety because of this kind of map that we've talked about, the script that some teams have followed. And I think this team, if they're well coached, they have the athletes to give us some challenges in midfield in particular. If they do set up this kind of mid-block, let our center backs have the ball, man Mark McGregor. We know the recipe now. We've been talking about it for weeks. So if they set up that way, then, I think they've got enough talent and athleticism to hit us on the counter that it could be problematic. So that's the concern. The other thing I'll say is that their Champions League campaign has been very different than ours in that they've had a much more challenging draw. And I'll read those off. So first of all, they had to beat Galatasaray to get into it. So, not too shabby. They played home to Aston Villa, away to Barcelona, home to Inter Milan, at Shakhtar. I don't know if Shakhtar is still playing in Poland or where that game was at. Home to Atalanta, and away to Stuttgart. Right. So that's a little different than what we've experienced. So this idea that they're bottom of the league and their goal difference is embarrassing, that's a pretty tough row of games. So I wouldn't underestimate these guys, is kind of what I'm getting at. Despite, all of the reasons why we should be in our material favorites, I do see a way that this could be a very uncomfortable game. And the fact that they have this new manager just makes me more concerned about that, because it's the unknown, and the unknown's always, harder to plan for. And, how organized and prepared is our team going to be, given the fact that we don't have a lot to go on? Meaning that I doubt this guy would have showed a lot of his cards in this game on Saturday, given their opposition. It didn't work out great for him. He got a draw, no draw, but he had 23 shots. They had higher XG. Like, it wasn't, it was one of those games where it very easily could have been a 1 or 2-0 for them. So that's my little longer than elevator summary on Young Boys.
Yeah, it might be easier to predict what's going to happen if they were managed by Derek McInnes, but unfortunately it's not the case. It does make me laugh sometimes, the number of Celtic supporters who have said they love this new format of the Champions League and it's the way forward. And yeah, that's easy to say when you've had the draw like we've had, where there have been a couple of matches where you think, yeah, we should probably get something out of that. If we'd had a draw similar to Young Boys, maybe we wouldn't be quite so positive about the new format and how it does or doesn't benefit us. Alan, you've heard what James's summation is of what we might face on Wednesday night. What's your thoughts on it, given that obviously it's been a while since we've been in European action, and the situation might be slightly different compared to maybe what we might have faced before Young Boys went on their winter break?
Yeah, no, I think James is right to highlight that they've had a really, really, really tough draw of matches, which is one of the quirks of this format. But it's not the case to say that they've had a really tough run of matches. I know they've been really unlucky in those games. I mean, they've been pretty much overmatched in all these matches, right? So let's be clear about that. I mean, they're averaging minus 2 xG compared to the opponent across those games. So even the one game where I think Inter scored a 90th minute winner, Inter generated well over 3 xG in that game. It could have been like a 5-6-0 really at that level. So the one game that they had, which I would say is a useful benchmark, would be Shakhtar. So we've played Shakhtar last year. We had 2 draws and definitely had the better of both matches, whereas Shakhtar were reasonably comfortable in their victory over them. So take that as probably being a more accurate benchmark. But before I get too giddy about things, so 3 things that are worrying me. One has already been mentioned. They've got a new manager. Therefore, we have no idea how he's going to set them up. Now, to be fair, the previous manager, altered his formation pretty much every game as well. They were 4-4-2, 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, etc. The new guy, Contini, he is the epitome of, a kind of, journeyman manager. I mean, in fact, he's only ever coached. He's never coached in the Champions League. He's only ever coached in Europa League qualifying. So he's never even coached group stage football before. In the Super League, the Swiss Super League, which is their premier sort of division, he's only ever managed teams to losing seasons. He's never even had a winning season in that level. So, but every dog has their day and all that. And that doesn't mean to say he's not smart. It doesn't mean to say he can't set up a team to frustrate Celtic. But so, it may be slightly unlikely given his kind of pedigree, and given their performances in the Champions League thus far. But it's that unknown. That unknown adds to the sort of risk level. The second thing is that concerns me is that the one thing they do in the Champions League, which is actually getting towards the upper percentiles versus all the other teams in the competition, is pressing and counter pressing. They are monsters for it. They absolutely monsters for it, and they do it a lot. Now, again, I don't know if the new manager's big on that, but they are very active in counter-pressing and pressing, especially in the opposition's half. And we know that for Celtic, that can cause an awful lot of stress. If they press Trusty and Carter-Vickers and therefore leaving 8v8 behind them, that's good for Celtic. But if they're very smart about their pressing and press everybody else apart from Trusty and Carter-Vickers, we know that can end quite badly. But having said that, if you look at Celtic's pressing effectiveness, they're probably comparable. They're not like a lot better at it than Celtic. They're probably on a level with Celtic in that regard. The other thing which worries me is actually based on a negative for them, which is their shooting has been just awful. They've actually taken more shots in the competition than Celtic because they seem to, I'm guessing they shoot from absolutely anywhere. Their average XG per shot is 0.06, which is awful. It's less than half Celtic's. Celtic are amongst the best in the competition at 0.13 in terms of shot quality. It's like actually 99th percentile in the competition. But as I say, they've had more shots than Celtic, despite averaging 42% possession. So although this team, their passing is awful, their defending is awful, and again, I'm talking about the Champions League level here, against very good sides, right? They do press very well. And Celtic are, although they press well in open play, we're one of the worst teams in the competition at generating chances off of our pressing, whereas they're one of the better teams. So the pressing aspect of it worries me. And the shooting aspect of it, although their shooting is dreadful, it comes back to they might be due one. If one of these shots goes in from 40 yards or 30 yards or wherever the hell they shoot from, and I'm guessing they shoot from everywhere, that's the sort of thing that happens on a Champions League night. You lose the game 2-0. You've had 25 shots, they've had 2, and you lose 2. That we've seen that happen. We've seen it happen more than once. It's exactly what happens against even this level of competition. So that worries me. All the rest of it, even the goalkeeper, on StatsBomb, their goalkeeping is minus 0.64 OBV for goalkeeping. That is dreadful. That is really, really bad. Schmeichel's kind of 84th percentile, so he's good. He's good. He's very good at Champions League level. So, again, is he due to have a good day? Perhaps all that. So all that. Listen, Celtic should win this game. Celtic are, by any measure I can find, a better football team, but we've just got these unknowns, and we've got these variables which probably are kind of we're definite risks for Celtic. And the shooting thing, you never know how that's going to go, a deflection and so forth. And they're better players again, are probably in central midfield. The Polish player Lakomi and Ugrinich, Swiss international, are both central midfield players. They're probably the two better players. And, we know that in midfield we were not great press resistance wise. McGregor can be harried in that regard. So I'm just laying out the